A body composition that is subpar is the first sign of poor metabolic health. Your BMI is the least interesting health fact about you. Just because someone is small, lean, big, strong, fat, it doesn't translate to poor or good metabolic health in like a one-to-one relationship. The first thing for metabolic health is the reduction of visceral fat. What is the ideal visceral fat level? 0. Visceral fat, vicious fat. In several cases, some level of subcutaneous fat is protective, and particularly for women. We have to be so careful not to confuse what we see, for better or for worse, with health.
How do I improve my metabolic health? So in today's episode of The Upward Spiral, we are tackling a crucial aspect of well-being, and that is your metabolic health. So you're going to learn key markers, actionable strategies for nutrition and training, and how to build sustainable habits for lifelong wellness. And joining us today is someone who truly embodies this transformation, someone who has helped over 1,000 women through massive life transitions, and someone who has emerged stronger and healthier after 3 pregnancies in 4 years, and someone who is a co-founder of a clinic that is revolutionizing how we view metabolic health. Please now welcome to the podcast, Amanda Lim.
Thank you so much. I'm really, really happy to be here.
Oh my God, me too. I am just so excited to get into this conversation with you. And this is another one of those episodes where it's like, I'm really going to try and not make this about me, but there are going to be things that I want answers to.
Should we have a character vignette, it might seem a little bit like Michelle.
Yeah, okay, yeah, exactly. Let's get straight into it. So what is metabolic health and why does it matter?
Yeah, so let's talk about what is metabolism.
Okay.
Right? I feel like people always love to tell me they have a slow metabolism, they have a fast metabolism, but they have no idea what that is.
And people love to tell me because I'm small, I've got a great metabolism. I must have
and
a
it
great
may or may not be
metabolism.
true. It may or may not be true. Phenotype, what you look like, does not always correlate to metabolism. Sometimes yes, and we'll talk about some of those occasions. But what I'll say is this, metabolism is how we intake, process, and store energy. So that's what metabolism is. And every process that is contained within those 3 levels is your metabolism. Okay. Metabolic health is when all 3 of those things are happening synchronistically, beautifully, in tandem with synergy.
Yeah.
That's what metabolic health is. Metabolic dysfunction is when there's a problem in one or more of those pathways. So whether it's in intake, the way that the intake is processed, the way that the processing is stored, or one of the 3 on their own. Okay.
Oh, immediately so many questions. But maybe let's just come back. I want to try and keep it to a little bit of what I've got on here. So some people equate metabolic health with weight loss.
Oh, kills me.
So tell me.
Slays my soul. So, if there is one thing that I want, particularly women, but also the men listening, to take away from this, it is that you cannot tell someone's metabolic health by looking at them. Phenotype does not translate to internal or invisible health. And we'll talk about some of the invisible health factors I'm referring to. Yeah. But if there's one thing for takeaway, it's that just because someone is small, lean, big, strong, fat, it doesn't translate to poor or good metabolic health in like a one-to-one relationship. So that's the first thing.
Yeah.
Second thing is this, right? How can we tell if we're metabolically healthy? We have to look at 3 markers. We have to know our body composition, which is our ratio of lean body mass to body fat. We have to, and even more, if we want to get really more detailed, we have to know what type of fat we carry. Is it subcutaneous or visceral? We'll talk about that. And we need to know where our muscle is carried. Is it along our limbs or is it in our trunk? So we'll talk about that as well. Yeah. Second is your VO2 max. How good is your body at uptaking oxygen at its maximal workload? And third is grip strength. Right? And this one seems kind of funny. People are like, oh, okay, so should I get one of those little, squeezy hand grips and just start doing 100 reps a day? No. Grip strength is a proxy for muscular function. And the function of a muscle is what is actually really important in metabolic health.
What are some of the signs that maybe someone's metabolic health isn't very good?
Yeah. So first of all, signs that metabolic health are not good. And again, think about the 3 dimensions, body comp, VO2, and hand grip. Okay, so first things first. Body composition. If you are carrying more fat than you like, or if you feel too weak or too out of breath, let's say, to do your daily activities, that's a sign that you have poor metabolic health. Your muscle's not optimized Your cardiovascular power is not there. And again, you're carrying weight. You have an energy storage problem that you are not satisfied with. So a body composition that is subpar is the first sign of poor metabolic health. Yeah. Secondly is how you feel. And this goes back to my invisible markers. If you wake up listless without energy, if you wake up feeling exhausted even with enough sleep, right? Yeah. These are some of the signs that something is going wrong with the way that you process energy. Yeah. All right. And particularly, with your energy intake as well, the type of food that you're eating. Yeah. When it comes to VO2 max, if you struggle to run 1 mile, which is 1,600 meters, so if that distance is daunting to you, and when I say run, I just simply mean proceed with both feet off the ground at some point, it could be the slowest jog in the world, that would probably be a sign that your VO2 max is subpar. If you struggle to climb stairs and recover, so if after climbing a few flights of stairs, you're so out of breath that you need to take a seat or, have some time to recover, probably your VO2 max is poor. Yeah. And then thirdly, your grip strength, easiest thing. And again, this is not easy, but simplest way to test that is to try and dead hang off a bar. Yeah. If you can dead hang for 90 seconds as a female, you're doing great. 2 minutes as a man, excellent. Anything less than that, try to work it up. And if you can't hang on the bar at all, so if you can't support your weight off a bar at all, that's a really urgent sign that your grip strength is poor.
I've got an injured shoulder and I've been doing some dead hangs.
Yeah, great for the shoulder. But by the way, it's shoulder rehab is the second reason to hang off the bar. But yeah, grip strength is the first.
Yeah, but it is. It's always the grip that goes before anything else. Yeah, it's the hands.
Yeah. And again, it's like I said, it's not so much about, actually gripping. It's about the proxy that it means about your overall strength. Yeah. Yeah. So people who are generally carrying heavy stuff and hanging off of bars tend to have better grip strength, right? But heavy stuff doesn't need to be barbells necessarily. It can be grocery bags. Yeah. It's one of my favorite kind of grip training things is and I think every female can relate to this, is to try and get every single grocery bag up the stairs at once, without putting it down, really let that, the forearms and the grip get some work.
Nice. And so why do you think that kind of metabolic health maybe gets lumped in with weight loss, or why it kind of that term gets thrown around as you must have a good metabolism. I've got a bad metabolism. Why do we blame? Why is this term thrown around? Because what you've just said doesn't feel anything like what I've known before.
I always say your BMI is the least interesting health fact about you. BMI is body mass index. It's simply a ratio of height to weight. I love when I have a patient come in and say, my doctor told me I have a bad BMI. I was like, so your weight to height is bad? These categories are no longer relevant. If if you have a health professional in your life that's making decisions about your care based on your BMI, you need to find a new health professional. They're working on outdated information. Weight doesn't tell you anything about what's going on inside. Okay, it simply tells you how much mass you have against gravity. What's important to know is a different MI number, which is your SMI. That's your skeletal, or we're in Singapore, skeletal muscle index, okay? Yeah. What that is a ratio of the muscle on your limbs to your overall frame. Okay, so it shares a metric with BMI in that it's frame size, but it has more impact because it tells you exactly how much buildable muscle, so we don't count the muscle of the trunk for this particular measure. SMI is also related to ALMI, appendicular lean mass index. Okay, so the more kind of cutting edge exercise physiology science is using this ALMI measure as a measure of health outcome. Yeah. The higher that number, and by the way, no upper limit. Okay. So again, this is very different from BMI where there's an underweight category, right? And an overweight category. With SMI or ALMI, these are synonyms. The higher, the better. Okay. So we want to get more muscle against our frame to the extent that's possible for us.
And is that going to be harder the older we get?
Heck yeah. It's going to be hard for a few reasons. It's going to be hard for women, because women naturally do not build muscle as quickly or as efficiently as men. It's going to be harder for older folks. So of both genders, people that are aging struggle to hold on to muscle. Yeah. And thirdly, it's going to be hard from a mental game. Women in particular don't love seeing the scale go up. And the truth is this: lean mass, muscle, and bone are heavy, and they should be, okay? Fat is light, but porous. If you've ever seen, and if you haven't, by the way, and you're listening to this podcast, get on the Googles, alrighty? Have a look at what a kg of muscle looks like in your body.
Yeah.
It is flat, okay? It is lean, it is hard, it is just lining the bone. Have a look at what a kg of fat looks like.
Yeah.
It is fluffy, porous, full of air, huge, okay? So when women say, I don't want to build muscle because I don't want to get bulky, jokes. It's a joke. The tissue that's big size, is fat. It's never muscle. And if you feel that once you've accumulated some muscle mass, which by the way is extremely hard to do, we'll talk about what it takes. If you've accumulated some muscle mass and you feel that you've gotten bulky, unfortunately it means that you haven't addressed the body fat that is on top.
Yeah, and it's such a balance though, especially like as someone who's quite petite, you know, I'm 5'2", I'm around 48 kilograms, you know, I'm a small person, but that honestly, like that difference between putting fat on and putting muscle, like that can be 100 calories for me, you know?
The smaller you are, the more precise your numbers do need to be. That's true.
And how do we start to get those numbers?
So first things first, if you are concerned with body composition, right? We test your metabolism. So this fast and slow metabolism thing, there is a test for it, guys. So if you suspect that you have a fast or a slow, you can go ahead and test it. It's called your RMR, your resting metabolic rate. The way that the test is executed is that we put you into a state that simulates sleep to the best extent possible. Now, if you are actually asleep, we can't test you because the tube will fall out of your mouth. You breathe through a tube and we get you into a relaxed, restful state. I play some beautiful music for you. It's a lovely test. It takes about 10 to 20 minutes of collecting this kind of restful expiratory data, which is your exhale. And then it tells you from that data, not only how many calories your body burns at rest, which is important to know, right? Because we can always, we can adjust the variables of exercise and what we eat, but it's a lot harder to adjust what our body does in its natural state, right? So you need to know that number. But secondly, we know how many calories we're burning from fat and how many calories we're burning from carbs at rest. And this can give you the missing piece in the age-old question, what should I be eating?
Okay.
You must know what your body does in order to answer that question.
I'm 100% coming in for this test.
It's non-invasive except for tube in the mouth, okay? There's no exercise involved. People are always, because it's in the category of exercise testing, but it's no exercise at all. You lay down and you find out exactly what your machine does.
Yeah.
And like I said, your machine, your body is the hardware, okay? It's the computer.
Yeah.
You can put in different software. You can download exercise. You can download a diet, but the hardware, that's the stuff that's tough to change. So you need to know where that baseline is.
Yeah. And this is it. It's like, so I've done my metabolic testing for running. Yeah. So I know at what point, at what pace and heart rate my body will burn more fat for more carbs for fuel versus fat for fuel. Yes. And therefore, but I've done that. So I know how many carbs I need to be taking per hour that I'm running. And I do this as part of like my marathon training. But you know, I am double banding, I'm whooping, I'm Apple, I am tracking calories on multiple things. And every single time it's different. I am, you know, I did a 10.5K run this morning, and I've got one device telling me it was 700 calories, one telling me it was 500, one telling me it was 300. Yeah. And that is literally like that much of a difference.
Yeah. And what I'll say to that is that none of these measurements are unfortunately going to be like scientifically validated, right? Anything that's reading from your wrist is already less accurate than something reading from a chest strap. Anything reading from a chest strap is still less accurate than a lactate test, right? Blood lactate. So there's obviously varying degrees. What I will say is this, you know, double band if you want. Yeah. But what I think is better, right, is if we think about how we assess data, accuracy and reliability, right? Accuracy we don't have with these wearables. Reliability we can build as long as we're measuring the same things on the same tool in the same modality. Yeah. Right? So whether or not you burned 300 or 500 calories, there is an answer to that. But again, it might not be discernible from just the device. I would look more at the trends over time on the same device.
I think for that, I prefer the Whoop. Like, you know, I think it just gives you that kind of bit more, a little bit more data.
Yeah, fair.
So sorry, coming back. So we had the metabolic test that you can do at rest. Yes. Which sounds amazing. And I want to do that.
Super helpful.
What else can we do when it comes to metabolic testing?
Yeah. So another thing that you should know is the VO2 max, right? So again, the RMR is a baseline for determining nutrition interventions, but the VO2 max is literally the thing we're measuring. So it is already the outcome measure. That is the number you must know.
Yeah.
If you are someone who's been tracking your weight, let's say every day for 10 years or every month for 10 years or whatever, right? But you've never once tested your VO2 max, you don't know anything about your metabolic health.
Yeah.
All you know is about the variance in, yet again, how much mass you have against gravity, which is not anything that any scientist would need to know. What we do need to know is, what is your potential to live a healthy life? Those that have bottom quartile VO2 max are 400% more likely to die from all causes, everything, than those in the top quartile VO2 max.
Yeah.
This is dramatic.
And this is why, do you want to start wild? I was literally this morning on my run listening to a Diary of a CEO episode, his latest one, and the doctor on it literally quoted that exact same thing.
I think every metabolic health doctor and clinician loves this statistic,
Yeah.
because it is the most dramatic one that we have. Dr. Peter Attia says VO2 max is the single most powerful correlate of all cause mortality.
Yeah.
So if you don't know yours, you are literally missing out on the number one fact that you should know about your health.
And I don't know mine. I've never done the test.
Girl. Okay, now let's have a quick little aside, okay? The test is not cheap, okay?
Yeah.
In our lab, we offer it, it's in the 3 digits, right?
Yeah.
But what I will say is this: you don't have to do it super frequently. So this is not like blood work where you got to get it done every 6 to 12 months. This is something that you can do every couple of years, or even like, if you have a big training cycle coming up, maybe do it then. But other than that, it's something that you can kind of get done once in a decade and have a good sense of how your progress is. So that's the first thing. The second thing though, is that you can kind of do a little home version.
Okay.
And it's called the 2.4 kilometer run. So my Singaporeans listening that have any men in their lives that have been soldiers, y'all know what this test is. It's a 2.4 kilometer for time. Okay. And there is a great deal of validated research around your 2.4 time and your approximate VO2 max. So if you want to do it for free and you want to do it at home, do that. Google it, say, Google VO2 max calculator for 2.4 kilometer run. My Americans, this is 1.5 miles, by the way. Do the run and then plug it into the calculator. You'll get a pretty decent estimate.
Okay, nice. And when you do this run, are you doing it at a light jog, easy, or is it all out?
Girl,
Okay.
VO2 max is max. So you got to go to your max effort. You got to make it bleed a little bit, but you only do it, like I said, once every, few years. Yeah. So, get your glucose in, get all your fueling ready, have a good night's sleep, and then hammer it in.
Okay, nice. So if you're going to try this at home, do you want to warm up for a kilometer beforehand?
Yeah.
Or do you just go straight into it?
Yeah, great question, right? So if we're thinking about it on a standard track, a 400-meter track, right, we're talking about 6 laps. Mm-hmm. So you want to make sure that you have at least a lap or 2 of warm up, but you don't want to spend too much time warming up because you do want to have enough fuel to actually go for that maximal effort.
Yeah. I've never done it. And I think until I listened to this episode of Diary of a CEO this morning and yourself, I didn't realize the importance of knowing it from like a longevity perspective.
Absolutely.
I just kind of, because I've done my lactate test a couple of times just to see how well my body was kind of clearing lactate and get my exact heart rate zones. Yeah. I've done kind of my metabolic testing that we just talked about, my sweat testing. Yeah. And then I frequently do bloods, but I don't know. I didn't understand the point of doing the VO2 max.
Yeah.
So now I do.
Yeah, exactly. We should all know it. If you know your body weight, you should know your VO2 max. If you are invested enough to step on a scale, you should definitely be invested enough to do that test.
Yeah. So you've said kind of stepping on the scale. There's no correlation though it's more about your health rather than weight.
VO2 max?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You could be an overweight person with a great VO2 max. Yeah. So, there's an article that went around the New York Times that was from the New York Times that was very, very popular in our metabolic health circles. And it was, the summary point was this: if you're going to be fat, be powerful. Yeah. So if you're going to be, if you're going to have a high percentage of body fat, and again, visceral fat we'll have to talk about separately, but if you're going to have a high subcutaneous fat, that's actually protective in some cases. Yeah. It's hormonally efficient. There's some things that are great about having a bit more fat on you, but you got to have the muscle. And you also have to be cardiovascularly fit. Yeah. And this is a little bit trickier to do when you're at very, very high levels of weight.
Yeah, but it can be done. Right?
Yeah. I will say I'm not someone who says health at any size. I'm actually not. There is a point where the stress on your joints and the ability for you to perform what I just said, a 2.4 kilometer run quickly, for example, or, hang from a bar, once your body weight is very, very heavy, there is going to be a limit. It's hard to be metabolically healthy on the 3 outcome measures that I mentioned at truly any size.
Okay. And so coming back, we've got your metabolic test at rest.
Yes.
You've got your VO2 max.
Yes.
What else can we test?
Body composition. That's we got to get into the body comp. So you got to know what's going on inside the old bod, right? Yeah. So the easiest way to do this, the most available way to do this, is with a bioimpedance scan, something like an InBody. That's kind of the leader in this field. But if you want to go kind of gold standard, then we have our DEXA scan. Our DEXA scan is basically like an X-ray, a dual energy X-ray that basically looks at the different components of your body. So it's going to look at your body fat, your visceral fat, your muscle mass, as well as your bone density. Yeah, okay. And it's going to be able to kind of distinguish between those unique tissues. Bioimpedance scan is not going to be able to read bone density. So again, if you're interacting with a health professional that says I can tell your bone density from bioimpedance, you cannot. So what they do is they basically take the leftover from the things they can read and then say, yeah, that's probably your bones, but it's not as exact as a DEXA. The price point is going to be significantly different. So your DEXA scan is going to be in the $200 to $300 range. Yeah. Your bioimpedance read is going to be, anywhere from free to $50.
Let's just talk a little bit about body composition. This is something, honestly, I've struggled with. I think most women who grew up in the 90s and the noughties, have struggled with a distorted idea of what their bodies should look like or what they want their bodies to look like. Yeah. And I've always held a little bit of weight around my tummy. That's kind of always been my spot. I'm going to just ask this question, even if this is a ridiculous question, it's off topic. Can I just get rid of that belly fat?
I wish I could say that you can spot reduce.
Yeah.
You can't.
Yeah.
2 things you can't do. You can't spot reduce and you can't control where genetically you store fat.
Yeah.
This is why some women have no problem, having lean arms and some store fat in the upper arm. This is why some women have, a naturally big old butt and some have no flat butt. There is a genetic code to how you store fat. Now, epigenetically, right? Yeah. You can make changes. So you can be the best version of your genetically programmed self. Okay. So if you wanted to address belly fat, you would be addressing overall fat.
Yeah.
Right. So you would take the same fat loss approach for whatever fat loss you wanted.
And this is the problem though, is you get to that point where I just lose too much weight. I look gaunt. The face doesn't look good. Everything just looks not healthy.
Yeah.
And even then the belly's still not going to be flat.
Yeah.
I saw a surgeon about the belly.
Okay.
Post kids.
I was going to say, I think there should definitely be a mention of kids.
Yeah.
Pregnancy's effect on the midsection.
Yeah, exactly. That's it as well. It's not just belly fat. It's the sagging, the skin as well. I've got skin. And just wrinkling around the belly button, and an old piercing that doesn't.
What did the surgeon say? Just out of interest.
Okay, so it was really extreme, Amanda. So he basically was like, "We are going to sew your abs back together," and because I had a natural birth, he was like, "We can either cut you open and do a tummy tuck and pull everything down." But because you had a natural birth, we could do keyhole surgery where we'll do something called, I think he said it was Renuvion, which is they basically burn the skin from the inside out to tighten up the skin. And they'll do a little bit of liposuction. And then I will be bent over basically for 6 months. I won't be able to kind of sit up straight. There's a huge recovery with it. And just to clarify, I don't have a DR at all. There is no ab separation. So sewing back my abs felt really extreme.
Yeah.
And the thing that kind of panicked me a little bit as well was just not being able to train for 6 months.
Yeah.
Running is literally my therapy.
Yeah. And what's the impact on your bone density and your muscle mass if you take 6 months off for a cosmetic surgery? And I say that sounded judgy as hell, but you hear what I'm saying. You see the writing on the wall.
And what's going to happen then? What's the impact that's going to have over a long term of having the abs sewed together? They're not supposed to be. And they don't need to be because I don't have a DR.
Yeah.
So the whole thing very, very extreme. He was also then like, let's take some fat from the sides and pop it in your bum and we'll do the boobs and we'll do everything at one. And I was like, $100,000 later, I was like, no, okay, this has made me go the opposite direction. And I was like, no, I can't. No. This is no. I don't want this.
Can I comment on 2 things to that extent?
Yeah.
So first thing you just commented on is I think that when women perceive that they are accumulating a lot more fat in the midsection, to be fair, that's true. Meaning, so whenever I scan people, right, we do segmental analysis. So we look at each limb individually, look at the trunk. The trunk is always the big fat carrier with very few exceptions, right? My very athletic clients, that might not be the case. But general people, you're definitely seeing a little bit more accumulation here. But what I'll also say is the perception is inflated because of factors like you're talking about. Saggy skin.
Yeah.
Women who do have DR, so they have an abdominal separation, which kind of has widened the lower abdominal area. Yeah. Women who have chronic bloating.
Yeah.
So what they see as fat, it's actually air.
Yeah.
Okay. So there are elements that I think contribute to the perception of greater body fat around that area, just because the look is different. But the second thing is about tying the abs together, sewing the abs together. I did have a client who underwent this exact surgery. Yeah. And I will tell you the long-term impact. She had it, I want to say, like 11 years ago.
Wow.
Okay. And she's now in her 50s.
Yeah.
Here's the issue. Is that because her abs are sewn together, and so it's so tight there. Like you mentioned that recovery of being bent over. It's really, I mean, even now you can see how kind of rigid the tightened area is.
Yeah.
But she didn't work her abs for a long time because she was recovering.
Yeah.
Then she was scared to kind of do anything too aggressive. And then she was just kind of like, hey, it's flat anyway, so who cares?
Yeah.
The deep core muscles are not sewn together. So I want to make this very clear. The rectus abdominis, the six-pack on top, that's what they address.
Yeah.
The transverse abdominis, that one is just kind of left to its own devices. So that's the one, the corset muscles that actually, when we say engage your core, that's what we're referring to.
Yeah.
And if you don't work on those muscles, again, particularly in your 40s and 50s, you might be experiencing some later in life incontinence that you were not prepared for because you've let those muscles atrophy simply because the visual is there. I mentioned this at the beginning of the podcast, and I'll probably mention it again later, but we have to be so careful not to confuse what we see, for better or for worse, with health.
Yeah.
Right? You may see a flat stomach as your transverse abdominis is atrophying.
Yeah.
On the flip side, you might see some inches you can pinch, but you got damn good muscle tissue under there. So you're actually rocking and rolling on your healthcare. So, I think we just have to be really careful not to confuse what is visible with what is factual.
And again, I think this is the confusion with metabolic health, right? Because everyone just assumes like metabolic health is all visual.
Smaller, fitter, better. Yeah. Not necessarily. I think two words that I wish would leave the healthcare discussion, right? Like exit the chat, would be the words light and small.
Yeah.
Lightness, I always say that's the first red flag. If you're light on the basis of osteopenia, sarcopenia, right? If you're losing muscle and bone in the service of lightness, you are becoming frail, my friend. You are becoming weak. Let's replace those words. To make it a little bit more impactful. And then again, small, right? I mentioned earlier that muscle tissue is small. It is already small, right? But I was listening to Dr. Stacey Sims on Mel Robbins just recently, and she was talking, and I love this because it's such a great visual for us. Muscle is nature's Spanx. If you want to look held in and snatched and tight, girl, it is muscle that you want to build. So if you're looking for, again, small, which again, I don't love the word, but if you're looking for that particular aesthetic, muscle is the way.
Stacey Sims got me eating again. I love her. Like I'm actually a bit obsessed with her, fangirling.
No, she's lovely.
But and this has only happened like recently in the last few months, is eating as soon as I wake up when the cortisol spikes, eating within 30 minutes after training. Now, very, very regularly, I would get up, I would run 20 kilometers fasted, come back home, and I might have nibbled on like, maybe a gel, but often not. For a 20K, I wouldn't have anything. Get home, appetite would be gone post-run because I just, still kind of the adrenaline coming down off the run. Yep. Maybe 3 or 4 hours after the run, I would break my fast. I would eat. And it's just that, and then wondering why I'm not gaining muscle.
I was going to say, why you're literally catabolizing muscle. If someone was like, what should I do to break down my muscle tissue and never build it? I'd be like, do this. Yeah. This is the protocol for that.
Yeah. And I was just like, again, just this whole kind of mind, brainwashed from being younger. It's like, just do all the cardio, don't do all the strength, do all the cardio and you're going to be thin.
Yeah. All the cardio burns the calories.
Yeah.
No calories coming in burns the calories, meaning because they're not coming in. So this must be the greatest, right?
Yeah.
What we didn't realize back then is that what we've done is burn off all the tissue that burns calories at rest. So back to the RMR. And so we're overworking, exhausting ourselves in the service of what we could get for free just by building up some muscle.
Yeah. And so I've been trying to build up muscle for a very long time and not understanding why it wasn't working, because I still want to run. I love running. And like I said, it's my therapy, but it's like, how do we build that muscle while we still maybe want to do some endurance?
Yeah. And I mean, I would say there are different schools of intensity on that comment. Okay. So if you've ever listened to Dr. Mike from RP Strength, love him so much. He's my favorite bro. I always tell my husband that my husband's a physician. We work together at our clinic, and he is not the biggest Dr. Mike fan. Sorry, Dr. Mike, but I am. He's my favorite bro science. He is jacked up on anabolic steroids beyond belief, and he talks about his dosing and what he does, and he's so open about it. But so he's the extremist, I would say, on the don't do mostly any cardio because you're going to break down your muscle. Okay. Then on the other side of things, we have obviously like your marathoners, your Ironmen, your extreme ultra marathoners, endurance athletes who are like, yo, cardio is life. Right. And they're walking around with VO2 max of like 75, but ALMI is in the 5s, which, again, for my nutrition and exercise physiologists out there, not good.
Yeah.
Not good.
So how do we find that balance?
Great question. I think specificity of program. Yeah. So I think something that we probably all did in our younger years was we got the message that exercise is good. So, if you think about exercise, particularly for women as an evolution, okay, we went from the Victorian era of like, do not exercise. You will exhaust yourself. You must sit down on the fainting couch. Okay, so that's like the extreme. Then we have our mom's generation, right? Where they were sort of in the 70s and 80s getting into aerobics and the idea that cardiovascular exercise is good. Okay, dance aerobics, step aerobics, stuff like that. Great, better than nothing.
Yeah.
Then we get into, the 90s and the aughts, right? Where we are learning a little bit more about weightlifting. So enter things like body pump, right? Kind of dance fitness, but with weights in our hands. Okay, so a little better than just dance fitness alone. Now we are maturing into the era where we understand that progressive overload strength training, progressive overload in resistance against our body is the way. That's how we will build muscle. Yeah. And this is different from a fad because we actually have the science now. So I think previously there was kind of a disconnect between exercise physiology and what was culturally relevant. We're starting to join those two worlds, and people listening to podcasts like this and listening to more medical focused podcasts is a great Kickstarter for this type of unification. People are realizing that there is an answer.
Yeah.
We don't have to wonder, but what works? We know what works. And here it is, 2 things. Number one, and we're talking specifically about building muscle, and we'll talk about the place for cardio in a second. 2 things that build muscle. Number one is ingesting adequate protein. So we have to eat the protein to repair and build that tissue.
Yeah.
But number 2 is actually doing the resistance training. You have to lift the weights. So I always say, if you're loading the gun with protein, you got to fire it with resistance training. Otherwise, you're just sitting there with a loaded gun, chugging down these chicken breasts and protein shakes, wondering what the F, and then running all that muscle away. So there does have to be kind of a 2-pronged approach for the category of muscle acquisition or muscle accumulation.
Yeah.
But cardio can still be there. I think what women need to understand, and I think what Dr. Stacy Sims covers quite well, and I'll summarize, is that if you're going to be an endurance athlete, so if you're going to do this long distance exercise, and she herself is an endurance athlete, I think people forget that, she, even though she purports a lot of things like plyometrics and HIIT, she herself comes from an endurance background. So she's not saying that stuff can't be done, but it has to come with adequate fueling.
Yeah.
Under-fueled endurance exercise is catabolic. So that is where you will lose muscle tissue. So even if you're lifting on the days you're not running, if the days that you're running, you're underfueling, you're leaving muscle on the table, girl. And you're going to be caught in that constant cycle of trying to build, but breaking it down. Trying to build, but breaking it down.
Yeah.
Right? So endurance without fuel is poison for your muscles. Similarly, lifting weights without sleep, same thing. Right? You're spinning your wheels. You're doing the work in the gym. You're not doing the work to recover. Net neutral. Your body is not adequately recovering to build tissue.
Okay. No one's explained that before. I've never heard that said about sleep and muscle.
Absolutely necessary. Here's the thing, back to Dr. Mike. I love you, Dr. Mike. Please listen to this. If you observe the bodybuilding community, and by the way, I am not a bodybuilder, never have been. I don't work with bodybuilders generally. I've worked with a few that have competed on stage, but I'm not their main coach. Let's put it that way. But what we can learn from the bodybuilding community is how to accumulate muscle. Okay, they are the experts in that, right? They might also be doing steroids and they might also be doing these self-harming practices, right? And I remember a bodybuilder that I work with, he would get his water from eating iceberg lettuce. He wouldn't actually drink water because it would affect his vascularity.
Yeah.
Crazy shit.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is what we can learn from bodybuilders is kind of, okay, if they're doing the extreme of this, what's the pared down version?
Yeah.
Bodybuilders that are looking to build are sleeping 10 to 12 hours a night.
Yeah. Here for that.
They are sleeping 10. They are in bed at 8. They are up no earlier than 6. Like this is, or whatever their sleep schedule is. But the point is like they prioritize sleep in the way that, we would prioritize eating food or, taking a vitamin. Like it's a necessary part of their life. For us, right, who have, non-bodybuilding careers, you got to make sure you're getting 7 to 9, and even if it's 7, right? So even if 9 is in my life is a joke.
Yeah.
I've never seen 9 hours since having kids, not one time.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't even come up, but at least getting the minimum dose is crucial. Yeah. This is like the VO2 Max, right? Where it's like, it's not necessarily about being elite so much as avoiding the bottom quartile. Same applies with sleep. It's not so much about getting 10 hours as not getting 5 hours.
Yeah.
Right. So just make sure that you're not beneath the minimum necessary to achieve the composition goals that you want.
So we've talked about body composition. We've talked about VO2 Max, grip strength. So just before, I think, what's the difference between gaining muscle and building strength?
Oh, great question, girl, because this is also confounded, right? So, back to my bodybuilders example, they typically would have decent grip strength, but not as much as, let's say, a CrossFitter.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and again, I'm obviously pulling out CrossFit because it's my sport, but we do tend to have superior grip strength. Here's why. Yeah. Because we are constantly gripping heavy stuff, pulling our body weight and supporting our body weight in space, which is the category of gymnastics or calisthenics.
Yeah.
So for example, if someone who's a calisthenics athlete who can do, kind of the dragon flag and all that cool stuff, front levers, they probably have amazing grip strength because their grip can support their body weight in space. Strength is more important than size. So this is an important message, I think, for women who are, somewhat trepidatious about getting more size in their muscles. Yeah. It's not about the size. It is about the function. Yeah. We need to get your muscles strong and functional. They may grow a bit in size, but honestly, the fat loss that would come along with a program that would make a more functional muscle would then compensate for that, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
If you want to grow in size, it will take effort. Yeah. It won't happen accidentally. So if you start a training program that's focused on getting you stronger, the off chance that it would make you huge is almost zero.
Okay, so I want to get stronger, and this has come from last year. I did High Rocks. Yeah. I think it was September time. I did it on my own. Yep. And I'm a runner, so I can do those.
No worries on the case.
4-minute kilometers, great. Things like the ski erg and the rower are always going to be a little tougher for me because I'm so short. Yeah.
Height's not in your favor.
They're taking me 5 minutes each to do. The thing, and honestly, the walking lunges, the wall balls, the farmer's carry, great. The broad jump burpees, easy. Yeah. Right, got all those down. Yeah. Where I really struggled was the sled push and pull, particularly the pull. Yep. And I think the pull took me like 9 minutes. Yeah. And it really lowered my time. And I just came out of it and was so frustrated. And I just was like, I don't feel strong enough because I haven't got the weight to pull or push into that sled. When it's 102 kilograms, it's more than double my weight. I just didn't have the strength. Yeah. So I came out of that and I was like, I want to get stronger.
Yeah. And let's, first of all, I want to make you feel a little bit better. Yeah. High Rocks is a standardized event. It's standardized for all males and then for all females. Yeah. Weightlifting is a weight classed event. It is not standardized across any gender. Yeah. It's standardized to your weight. So those sled pulls and pushes being much harder for you as a short and petite woman
Yeah.
That's not your fault. That's not a strength failing.
Yeah.
That's literally you're competing in a category that's probably way outside of what would be a reasonable, the effort for you to push it is much more than the effort for me to push it, but we're in the same division.
Yeah.
So, so just take that with a grain of salt.
Thanks.
That
Making me
nobody
feel a little bit better.
yeah, you are not weak because of the sleds. Yeah. It's like the sleds are not titrated to your size. And in any weightlifting competition, it is. So like, like that, that's know that if you were ever to get stronger, it would be against women in your exact class. Right. Yeah. High rocks is a little bit difficult. I will say they do a good job of programming in the sense that there are some things like, again, being light and fast is great for the runs. Yeah. And the runs are the majority of the race. So you actually get a net positive, real talk.
Yeah.
But I hear you. But in terms of getting stronger, right? The sleds are another great example of the difference between strength and power. Okay. So how much can you generate in a given moment versus how much can you generate over time? Yeah. And both dimensions are necessary for a competition like that.
Yeah.
Stacy Sims, bless her heart, we're going to mention her 10 times today. She is a huge proponent of women developing powerful muscles. Yeah. Muscles that can perform under time, meaning in a given time rather than just, 10 reps of your best, right? Yeah. Which is why the advice that I would give to you in improving that particular event, but in improving overall strength would be to vary up your strength training days. So you said you have 3 of them.
Yeah.
Okay. Make sure at least one of them has power training. And make sure that either or you have a little bit of power training in each one.
Yeah.
So you can do a powerful day or you can do, little powerful segments. I'm more of the little powerful segments person. And I'll tell you why, because power takes more recovery.
Yeah. And so could you just give me a couple of examples of some power movements or exercises?
Yeah. So 1 rep maximums are your obvious examples, right? So what is the heaviest weight you can do for one time?
Yeah.
So that's an example of a power movement. A sport that tests those limits is a sport of powerlifting. So what you do is you do 1 bench press, 1 back squat, and 1 deadlift.
Yeah.
And the total weight that you can carry is your score. So that's like literally the definition of power. But more fun power, right, is stuff like box jumps, wall balls, medicine ball throws. Things that basically, measure how much power you can generate against mass in a given moment with velocity, right? With time, with speed. So you can, incorporate things like jumping and throwing.
So what I'm just kind of piecing all of this together when we talk about the metabolic markers is when we look at body composition, and I'm just going to kind of give this in the context of me and my goals and my health, and hopefully this will kind of help other people, is that in the body composition for me, like I always want to kind of reduce the amount of visceral fat.
Yes.
And increase my muscle mass. Those are kind of important to me. With my VO2 max, like I want to increase my cardiovascular fitness, which I'm hoping is pretty good given the amount I run.
Yeah, I'd say you probably have a real good base goal.
But I've got a small lung capacity. So just very quickly on that, being a small person and having a small lung capacity, would that affect the VO2 max score?
It would affect your maximums.
Yeah.
So just like men will always have higher maximums than women, they have bigger lungs. So like they will always exceed the amount of oxygen uptake that we could have. But again, doesn't matter what men are doing, and it doesn't matter what anyone is doing outside of relative to your age and gender, right? Yeah. So what is top quartile is only relative to your age and gender.
Okay, amazing. I have one more question on the VO2 max is if you are doing a lot of breath work, maybe a lot of yoga or anything that's going to be increasing your capacity to take more oxygen in a rested or meditative state, could that improve your VO2 max score?
I have to say, I'm not actually familiar with the literature on breath work and VO2 max, but I would love to explore that more.
I was thinking about it this morning when I was listening to the Diary of the CEO episode. I was like, I wonder
there may be science behind that. I just honestly don't know it.
Okay, amazing. And then when it comes to grip strength, it's like, and this is something I said earlier, like I've been looking to get stronger. So like I've loved talking to you because I've been able to kind of differentiate between like the building of the muscle and the increasing of the muscle.
And the performance of the muscle.
Yeah, exactly. But for body composition, the reduction of fat, the increasing the cardiovascular fitness and building strength is actually all part of improving your metabolic health.
That's it. And I'll talk about one thing in each of those categories.
Yeah.
So the first thing for metabolic health is the reduction of visceral fat.
Yeah.
So what is the ideal visceral fat level? 0.
Wow.
Zero.
Okay.
So remember when I said there's no upper limit for how much muscle you could have and it would be beneficial for you?
Yeah.
There is no lower limit for how much visceral fat you have because any is
hang on.
doing you.
We've got two things of fat. We've got subcutaneous fat and visceral fat.
Yes.
So visceral fat is the fat that's like in your arteries and around your organs.
Correct. So visceral fat is the basically deep abdominal cavity fat.
Yeah.
Think of it as the one that will kill you. So I always say visceral fat, vicious fat.
Okay.
Okay. So you can never get it twisted which one's the bad one. Okay. Because visceral fat is the bad one. It is the one that we look at when we're assessing metabolic risk. Okay. So everyone, like I said, everyone has their areas that they love to pinch an inch. Okay.
Yeah.
That's subcutaneous. So the fat between the skin is right under the skin, I should say, is your subcutaneous. In several cases, some level of subcutaneous fat is protective, and particularly for women.
Yeah.
Some level of subcutaneous fat is essential for our hormones to function properly.
Yeah.
So if you get hyper lean or if you sustain a state of hyper leanness, so, thinking about my sport of CrossFit, right? A lot of the girls do get lean at certain points in the season and then they actually bulk back up during the off season because it is so much more protective and hormonally functional for them.
Yeah.
Right. If you are a woman that's losing your period in the, your regular menstrual cycle in the pursuit of leanness, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
I'll tell you right now, you're absolutely doing it wrong. You have to have these markers of kind of overall health, which include your bowel health, your menstrual health, in order to be a truly healthy person. Yeah. Visceral fat, though, is the one that kills you. It's the pro-inflammatory tissue. It's the one that's correlated with cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, hyperinsulinemia, all of that stuff, right? Yeah. So if you want to have the absence of disease, you want to have your visceral as close to zero as possible.
And so what causes visceral fat?
Girl, in the general sense, an excess of food intake. Okay, so that we're going to talk about calorie surplus is the first and foremost culprit in accumulating any sort of mass, but particularly visceral. Let's talk about the types of excess calories that we want to avoid. Processed. So processed sugars and processed foods because they're the easiest to overeat.
Yeah.
Right? It's not that necessarily one single ingredient of a processed food is poison. Okay, although there are not great ingredients in a lot of our foods, but it's more that they are easier to eat, which makes it easier to go into a calorie surplus, which makes it easier to have excess fat hanging around, right? Yeah. So it's, the surplus mechanism is what we really want to focus on. And I hope that actually makes it simpler for people as opposed to chasing something like minute, like oxalates or, something like an ingredient. Yeah. Just chase your maintenance or deficit depending on what you're looking for, okay? Yeah. Second thing that would affect visceral fat, alcohol intake. Unfortunately, right? Alcohol intake is not so great for the metabolic pathways. What it literally does, the way I describe it to my clients, it takes the train off the tracks. Yeah. Right. So if you've got your train chugging along, putting, your energy intake is optimized, your energy processing is great, your energy output is wonderful, you're not storing in the wrong areas, you introduce alcohol, knocks it all down.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because it poisons the intake. It affects the processing in that it shuts off the processing of muscle accumulation, muscle protein synthesis, and fat loss. And then it encourages the storage of fat in the liver.
Yeah.
So every single context of metabolism is hit by alcohol. Not the case with other food.
Almost 3 years sober, and it wasn't overnight that I noticed the change. It took kind of 6 months into probably not drinking, but yes, like body composition, sleep, mental capacity, energy, emotional regulation, everything, all
improved.
Oh yeah.
And that is the reality. It's, the WHO came out and said there's no safe level of alcohol. And what they're referring to is there's no beneficial level of alcohol for someone who's seeking better metabolic health.
Oh, I feel like we have covered so much, but I just want to kind of wrap up with any like nutritional or training strategies for metabolic optimization.
The biggest thing in nutrition, and we've kind of alluded to it in several ways, but I want to spell it out darn clear, the avoidance of processed foods. So limiting the amount of food that's from a bag or a box, has added sugar, added sodium, additives in general. This is the number one thing you can do to make it easier to move toward an optimized body composition. Okay, so number one is to try and eliminate the food sources that are not whole foods.
Yeah.
The second piece of the puzzle, and I would say these are equal, so it's not 1-2, it's 1-1, adequate protein intake. You have, especially if you are active, but even if you are not, because we're all aging, and this is also relative to aging folks. You have to have enough protein, not only to run your body processes, not only to repair your muscle tissues, but also to build them. Okay, so we need like more protein than you can imagine. When we see the RDA minimum, 0.8 grams per kg, kill me on protein, what we're seeing is what is necessary to function your organs. Yeah. That's not what most of us are looking for. Most of us are looking to perform better and get leaner. Yeah. So that protein intake is higher. That demand is more. I like my women around 2 grams of protein per kg. Yeah. 1.6 is like my do or die lower limit. 2.2, 2.4 is more what I get as a highly active woman who's looking to accumulate mass. So just to give you an idea of the wide range of what's there, but it's double at minimum what the RDA is purporting. So be aware. And then in terms of fitness, I suggest, first of all, progressive overload in your resistance training. I suggest thinking about your workout. If you're someone who's brand new to exercise, first tip is get a personal trainer to walk you through a program. You don't need to employ them forever. You know, just like you don't have to get blood work every single day, you have to get blood work once so that you know that your cholesterol is high so that you can get yourself on a statin or whatever it may be. Or, you know, like it's like you have to have some sort of information to then build a program. Okay. Yeah. So if you're brand new to weight training, you're going to walk into a gym and just be overwhelmed by the options, by what seems very foreign, what the machines do, et cetera. Yeah. Get a trainer, get somebody to walk you through a specific, I mentioned this before, specific program and show you how to overload that program. So show you, you can't do the same way. I love when women, this is bless their hearts, when they come to me and they say, I use 10s. I'm like, pardon? They're like, dumbbells. I use 10-pound weights for weightlifting. I was like, for what movement and when and for how many weeks and for how many reps? Like there is no program that's effective that's stagnant. Yeah. So if you've been doing the same program for even a couple of, even a couple of years, it's time for a change. Okay. Yeah. You need to load that program through one of the 4 variables, which are frequency, intensity, time, and type. You either need to do more lifting. You need to take that lifting up a notch with load. Yeah. You need to make sure that you're spending more time on your lifting, doing more sets and reps, or you need to add lifting to your program, the type of exercise, right? Or add power in your case, right? You can play with those 4 variables, but something has to change over time in order to actually produce these body composition changes that we want. Yeah. The last thing in terms of your program is there are things you have to include. I had a client recently on my program called The Method, and she ended up leaving the program because she said, I don't like the types of exercises you assign. Yeah. And I got to be honest with you guys, there are only so many types of exercises that are effective. Yeah. Okay. So I can't assign you things that don't move the needle. What moves the needles are the fundamental movement patterns in the categories of squat, hinge, push, pull, rotate, and carry. Yeah. You have to include movements in each of these major categories. And within those categories, they have to be compound lifts. So for example, in the category of, let's make a clear example. Biceps curls are not in any of those categories. Yeah. You can add them on once you've had those 6 categories covered, but they are not in themselves a fundamental movement pattern. Yeah. So it's not exactly like a buffet where you can just pick and choose. It's more like you have to make sure you have an entree and then you can add the side dishes. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. I love that. And I think, I've never looked at my training program and gone
for those.
Yeah, for those. And I think I probably need to go back and look at it.
Yeah. And again, nothing against biceps curls, right? I need to be doing more biceps curls for real. But what I'll say is like, they're a side dish. They're not the main event.
Yeah. Oh my God. Okay, honestly, like we're out of time, but just before we go, is there anything else that we haven't covered that you would just like to touch on when it comes to your metabolic health?
Again, if I can just send the message one last time, and particularly to the female ears that are listening, that the way you look does not reflect your actual health status. And that applies for better and for worse. Yeah. Just because your BMI is in the normative range does not mean you're healthy. Just because your BMI is outside the normative range does not mean you're unhealthy. If your healthcare professional is not doing the type of work that I've described here, so assessing your body composition, your ALMI, your SMI, looking at your athletic markers, it may be time to seek out a new professional that has a more holistic view.
Oh, this is wild. I'm going to come and see you. I'm going to come to the clinic. I'm going to get some testing done.
Yay.
I'm going to look at where I can, make improvements on what I'm doing, what I'm eating. I'm a big person on when it comes to all of the data. I really believe like the more information that we've got, particularly kind of about yourself and your own health,
yes.
the better you can know how to proceed.
Yeah. Know your numbers.
Yeah.
Then make decisions.
Exactly. I think that kind of makes me a little bit of a biohacker, which is exciting. But thank you so much. I've loved talking to you, and I feel like we could have had like 10 conversations.
We could. Maybe we'll do it again.
I think we should do a part 2 for sure. Maybe we come back and see how we're getting on, and maybe we can track the progress.
I'd love it.
I think that's amazing. Amanda, thank you. And to everyone still listening, I'm going to link to all of Amanda's profiles, channels, website, everything below. Please reach out to her. And if you've got any questions, please add them in the comments. I'll make sure that she answers. And honestly, I hope this has been as eye-opening for you guys as it has for me. I feel like I really have learned so much about metabolic health and you really have helped clear up a few things for me. So really, thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thanks for the feedback.
Thanks. And to everyone still listening, if you want to, please do subscribe. It really helps, and it helps bring in some amazing guests like Amanda. So thanks again, and we'll see you soon. Bye.
Bye.